Hey, legend. Maybe you're sitting there with a cup of tea. Maybe lying down in bed, ready to drift off to sleep. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're about to step into the shadows of history, into the world of power, ambition, and secrets that even time struggles to reveal. So, settle in, take a deep breath, and let your imagination wander. Because Rome is about to awaken around us, and one man's legacy is about to challenge everything you think you know. Amid the echoing streets of Rome, still heavy with whispers of betrayal, a name quietly stirred the city. Gaius Octavius, a mere 18, fragile in body and untested in war. He arrived from the outskirts of Italy bearing a message that shook the very heart of the Republic. He was the chosen heir of Julius Caesar. The question lingered in every shadowed alley and marbled forum. How could a boy, barely more than a child, inherit the mantle of the most powerful man in the world? Was it destiny, or a design far more sinister? In every quiet murmur of the Senate, there was the faint trace of unseen hands pulling strings, orchestrating a drama no one dared fully understand. Caesar's will was read aloud in the forum, before a populace still trembling from the sight of their fallen dictator. It declared Octavius not merely the heir of his name, but the recipient of much of Caesar's vast fortune. On its face, it seemed a token of loyalty, yet some whispered darker possibilities. Perhaps the document had been subtly manipulated after Caesar's death, an invisible conspiracy craft to place a puppet on the throne of Rome. Yet the people did not question it. They needed a symbol, and the name Caesar still blazed brighter than any truth. Thus, Octavius began his journey, walking under the immense shadow of legend, where every step was scrutinized and every glance measured. But the path was far from welcoming. Many of Caesar's seasoned generals looked upon the boy with disdain. Mark Antony, Caesar's formidable and ambitious right hand, watched Octavius with a mix of contempt and suspicion. Blood ran in the youth's veins, but the greater danger lay in his name. In Rome, a name could cut deeper than any sword. And in the quiet hours, when the city murmured beneath the oil lamps, questions lingered. Who truly controlled the boy? Was he the rightful heir, or merely a pawn? A carefully positioned piece in the shadowy games of the Senate, designed to weaken Antony and manipulate the future of the Republic. Slowly, Octavius revealed his subtle claws. With a calm yet steely resolve, he began gathering royal legions. He liquidated Caesar's estates, raised armies, and called the veterans to rally under the banner of Gaius Julius, the now deified Caesar. Brilliant yet perilous, this strategy transformed him from a mere adopted grandson into the reluctant champion of a goddess vengeance. One by one, the people bent their knees, not to him, but to the legend he breathed into life. And behind his feigned, almost imperceptible smile, a lingering question remained. Was this his ambition alone, or the whispers of unseen hands guiding him from the shadows? The nights in Rome grew dense with silent schemes. Antony observed Octavius like a wolf watching a young lion grow too quickly, while the populace cheered the name, Octavian Caesar. Yet in the marble halls of power some senators gazed at the heavens, fearing they had conjured a new force of nature, someone who would twist Caesar's death into a resurgence of power greater than the Republic had ever known. And in the ruins of Rome's former freedom, a legend quietly awakened. But whose hand truly guided it remained cloaked in shadows. Was it Caesar's ghost whispering to his ear, or the same conspirators who once plunged the dagger into his back, now writing the opening act of a far deadlier mystery? Rome was a city of whispers, shadows, and shifting loyalties, and Octavianus, still young yet dangerously astute, found himself in the heart of the most perilous alliance the world had ever seen. The first triumvirate, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, was more than a pact. It was a delicate dance of ambition, betrayal, and hidden agendas. On paper, they were united by Caesar's legacy, yet behind closed doors, each moved as if stalking prey. And Rome watched, unknowingly trapped in a game where pawns were sacrificed, kings were tested, and even shadows could betray. From the very first councils, the tension was palpable. Lepidus, quiet and calculating, held vast wealth and influence, but his ambition was subtle, almost invisible. Antony, fiery and charismatic, demanded loyalty through fear and awe. Octavian, the youngest, learned quickly that in Rome, a name alone could not command armies, bend legions, or survive envy. Every meeting, every handshake was layered with unspoken threats. Who would strike first, and who would vanish without a trace? Rumors spread that some senators were secretly plotting to tear the triumvirate apart, feeding whispers to Antony and Octavian alike, each trying to outmaneuver the other while presenting the illusion of unity. Yet Octavian played a different game. He observed, listened, and waited, while Antony paraded his power across Rome and Lepidus maneuvered in the shadows. Octavian cultivated loyalty in quiet, unremarkable gestures. He honored Caesar's veterans, distributed wealth, and spoke in public forums as if guided by the ghost of the fallen dictator. His actions were small, almost imperceptible, yet they sowed a seed of influence far deeper than Antony's flamboyant displays or Lepidus' covert maneuvers. And in the quiet nights, when the Senate slept uneasy, questions lingered. Was Octavian merely surviving the game, or secretly rewriting its rules? The stakes escalated as alliances cracked under the weight of envy, desire, and ambition. Antony's growing attachment to Cleopatra fueled suspicion and whispers of betrayal, while Lepidus' cautious advances could either secure his position or doom him entirely. And in every twist, Octavian remained an enigma boy with Caesar's blood and a mind older than Rome itself. Rumors swirled, secret letters intercepted, coins mysteriously missing, soldiers bribed or quietly shifted between camps. Each subtle move became a silent dagger, leaving the city vulnerable to the unseen hands of power, manipulation, and deception. By the time Octavian stepped fully into the political arena, the triumvirate had become less an alliance and more a battlefield of shadows. Each man wore a mask, and Rome, blind to the invisible strings, was caught in a web of ambition too tangled to unravel. Octavian, patient and meticulous, began to see the pattern, a hidden hierarchy of fear, loyalty, and opportunity. And while the people cheered the names of their leaders, only a few knew the chilling truth. The game was never about unity, loyalty, or even Caesar's legacy. It was about who would survive the night, who would outwit fate itself, and who would emerge from the shadows to claim Rome forever. The air above Rome hung heavy with anticipation and dread, as if the city itself sensed the storm to come. Octavian, still a boy in the eyes of many, now faced the brutal truth of power. Blood would decide loyalty faster than words ever could. The remnants of Caesar's assassins Brutus and Cassius marched across the provinces with armies fueled by vengeance and ideology, while the young heir prepared his legions in silent, calculated precision. Shadows of betrayal flickered across every campfire, and whispers carried promises of glory, deception, and death. Rome's fate teetered on the edge of steel, strategy, and sheer will. The clash at Philippi became more than a battle. It was the crucible that would forge the identity of Octavian. Historians would call it a war of ideology, yet beneath the dust and blood, secrets, betrayals, and cunning schemes shaped every victory. Some claim letters were intercepted, supplies sabotaged, and loyalties bought in whispers. Soldiers did not only fight for command, they fought for the unseen hand directing the outcome, and Octavian, observing the chaos, appeared almost spectral in his patience, letting Antony and his forces absorb the brunt of the initial clash, while he quietly ensured the tide would turn in his favor. Victory was decisive, yet steeped in mystery. Brutus and Cassius, once titans of intellect and strategy, fell not merely by sword, but by the invisible threads of manipulation and premeditated misfortune. Octavian's legions, though loyal, seemed guided by more than orders. They moved as if destiny itself whispered information. In the aftermath, whispers of secret alliances, backroom dealings, and bribed generals swirled like smoke across the battlefield. Every triumph, every fallen commander, deepened the enigma of Octavian's rise. Was it merely skill, or was something darker at play, a subtle orchestration of fate that only he could command? Rome's streets awaited the return of its young heir, but the city was no longer naive. Citizens and senators alike sensed a power that was as invisible as it was unstoppable. Octavian returned not as the boy who inherited Caesar's name, but as a strategist whose patience and subtlety had won what others could not. Shadows clung to his every move. Eyes followed him with suspicion and fear. Even allies wondered quietly whether the man who had orchestrated Philippi had merely survived, or had already begun to reshape the destiny of Rome itself. And so the stage was set for the next chapter of intrigue, the confrontation with Antony and Cleopatra, the final fracture of the triumvirate, and the birth of a ruler who would ascend not just through force, but through cunning legend and calculated mystery. The young Octavian had survived the storm of men and blood, yet the real battle, the one that would decide the fate of Rome forever, was only beginning. Shadows stretched long over the city, hinting at the secrets yet to be revealed, and the questions that would haunt Rome for generations. Who truly controlled the legacy of Caesar, and what unseen hands would guide the rise of a new emperor? In the golden light of Alexandria, the world seemed to pause. The scent of the sea mingled with the whispers of empire, and there on a throne of silk and shadow sat Cleopatra, the queen who could disarm armies with a glance. To Mark Antony, she was not merely a ruler but a living storm, a mystery wrapped in beauty, intellect, and ambition. Their meeting was less diplomacy and more destiny, a collision of fire and fate that would ignite the final chapter of Rome's greatest power struggle. Yet, in the corridors of Rome, Octavian watched from afar, studying every rumor, every letter, every whisper that crossed the Mediterranean. Love had become a weapon, and Cleopatra's charm was its deadliest edge. To the people of Rome, Antony's love for Cleopatra was seen as treason cloaked in passion. The idea that a Roman general, one of their own, would kneel before an Egyptian queen was unthinkable, almost blasphemous. Octavian, ever the tactician, understood this sentiment better than anyone. He began to weave a web of propaganda so delicate and yet so venomous that it would poison Antony's name in every corner of the Republic. In the Senate, he whispered of dark rituals, of Cleopatra's manipulation, of Antony's loyalty slipping into the Nile. He painted them as lovers drunk on power, plotting to crown themselves rulers of the East and enslave Rome itself. The people did not know if it was true, but fear is stronger than fact, and Octavian mastered both. Behind the glamour and seduction of Cleopatra's palace, Antony began to fade into her orbit. The queen played her game masterfully, her eyes on the future, her mind calculating every gesture, every alliance, every heart she could bend. Yet the line between control and surrender blurred. Rome became distant, its politics a ghost. Cleopatra promised Antony immortality through love, but Octavian promised Rome immortality through order. And when the two visions collided, the gods themselves seemed to hold their breath. The world was no longer divided by land or wealth, it was divided by the hearts of three souls locked in an invisible war: Octavian's ambition, Antony's passion, and Cleopatra's will. When war finally came, it was not fought on the battlefield alone, it was fought in the hearts of men. The banners of Rome split in two, brothers faced brothers, and loyalty dissolved in the salt of the sea at Actium. Cleopatra's ships gleamed like jewels under the burning sun, but Octavian's discipline and cold strategy crushed their beauty with relentless precision. The lovers fled back to Egypt, their empire of dreams unraveling behind them. The sea turned crimson, and the world turned silent. Octavian did not celebrate, he simply watched, calculating, as if he had foreseen this ending all along. For him, this was not victory, it was the fulfillment of a prophecy written in whispers and blood. In the quiet aftermath, as Alexandria fell and Cleopatra's palace filled with smoke and salt, the lovers chose death over chains. Cleopatra's legend would live forever, her beauty, her cunning, her serpent's kiss. Antony's name would fade in tragedy, his loyalty lost to love, and Octavian, calm and untouchable, returned to Rome not as a man, but as a myth in motion, the survivor of every plot, the heir who had outlasted gods and queens alike. The story of Antony and Cleopatra would echo through eternity, but in the silence that followed, one truth lingered like a ghost. Sometimes love is just another form of conquest. Rome had seen conquerors before, but never one who conquered so silently. When Octavian returned from the ashes of Actium, the city did not erupt in cheers, it held its breath. He entered not as a warrior, but as something else entirely. A man who had mastered patience, illusion, and control. The Senate awaited his next move, expecting perhaps vengeance or monarchy. Yet Octavian offered something far more dangerous: humility. He laid his power at their feet, claimed to restore the Republic, and with that gesture, he enslaved their hearts. The senators, relieved and deceived, handed him authority eternal. Thus, through submission, he rose higher than any king could dare. Rome had no emperor yet, but it already had a master. They named him Augustus, the revered one, a title born of divinity, craft to sound sacred rather than tyrannical. Every symbol, every word, every public act was choreographed to perfection. Temples were rebuilt, roads repaved, coins stamped with his calm, divine face. He turned Rome into a theater, and he was both playwright and god. Yet behind this immaculate performance, a haunting question lingered. Was Augustus still the young Octavian who avenged Caesar? Or had he become something else, something less human, more eternal? The line between man and myth began to blur, as the empire itself took form beneath his silent gaze. What made Augustus so dangerous was not his sword, but his serenity. He ruled through balance, reward and fear, mercy and precision. Those who opposed him vanished not in screams, but in silence. Records erased, names forgotten, histories rewritten. He didn't need to crush his enemies. He simply rewrote their existence. Power to him was not about domination, it was about narrative. And in crafting the story of Rome's rebirth, he ensured that every citizen would see his reign not as tyranny, but as destiny. The Republic hadn't fallen, it had evolved. A beautiful illusion that endured centuries. But power built on reverence is fragile. The people called him a god, Yet gods must be perfect, and perfection demands sacrifice. Behind the marble statues and golden temples, Augustus bore invisible wounds. He had lost friends, family, and the warmth of being merely mortal. To secure Rome's eternity, he had surrendered his own humanity. The city adored him, yet he lived in solitude, a ghost in his own empire, surrounded by loyalty, but starved of trust. In chasing order, he had conquered chaos, but lost himself to it. And as the sun set over the marble city he had built, the mystery deepened. Who was Augustus truly? The savior of Rome, or the architect of its golden illusion? He stood as both the end and the beginning, the shadow of Caesar reborn as light. His empire would endure for 1,000 years, but within that triumph lay a paradox as old as time. The moment a man becomes a god, the world gains eternity and loses its soul. Rome gleamed like a crown beneath the Mediterranean sun. Marble temples, golden arches, and vast arenas rose where chaos once ruled. The world called it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But peace, as Augustus knew too well, was never free. It was purchased through fear, silence, and careful illusion. The Senate sang praises to their first citizen, not realizing that the republic they once defended was now a ghost wearing Augustus' smile. Every statue, every speech, every festival whispered one truth. Rome had not been saved, it had been transformed. Citizens rejoiced, poets sang of eternal glory, and merchants prospered under his name. Yet, behind the perfection, a quiet unease lingered in the air. Those who remembered the old days, the blood, the debates, the chaotic liberty of the Republic felt a chill in the order. Streets were clean, but voices were gone. Dissent had been buried beneath marble, replaced by harmony, too flawless to be real. The people loved their emperor because they were told to. They feared him because they needed to. And somewhere within that fragile balance, truth began to decay beneath the weight of obedience. Even Augustus, the great architect of illusion, could not escape the machinery he built. Each decree, each reform, each celebration tied him tighter to the divine image he projected. He was no longer allowed to doubt, to feel. The man who had mastered power became its prisoner. To preserve Rome's perfection, he had to hide its flaws and his own. Scandals were silenced, betrayals were written, and tragedies disguised as virtue. His family tore itself apart under the pressure of his legacy, their humanity crushed beneath the expectation of godhood. And yet, Augustus smiled, always serene, always eternal. The image never cracked. Historians would call this era a miracle, but miracles often come with shadows unseen. In the countryside, farmers whispered of taxes that drained their blood. In the Senate, old men toasted to freedom they no longer believed in. In the hearts of poets, doubt took root. Could peace truly exist if it was built on control? Could Rome endure if its god was still just a man behind the mask? The empire glittered like a jewel, yet every gem hides fractures beneath its shine. Rome's perfection was not truth, it was theater, and every empire built on illusion is one heartbeat away from awakening. As Augustus aged, the mirage he created began to waver. His body weakened, but the myth remained unbroken. Even in death, he refused to be mortal, his image carved into eternity, his name spoken as divine. Yet the question that haunted his reign echoed beyond his grave. Was it peace he built or silence? The empire would march on for centuries under his shadow, carrying both his brilliance and his curse. For in the heart of every golden age, there is always a secret. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it hides. When Augustus finally closed his eyes, Rome did not mourn a man, it mourned a myth. bells tolled across the empire, from the deserts of Egypt to the icy edges of Britannia. Temples filled with incense, senators wept in rehearsed sorrow, and the people whispered prayers to their departed god. Yet beneath the marble grief, a quiet dread stirred. Augustus had promised eternity, but eternity is a cruel illusion. The master of order was gone, and with him vanished the thread that held the empire's fragile harmony together. Rome stood still, listening for the voice that once commanded the world, and hearing only silence. His successor, Tiberius, inherited more than a throne. He inherited a curse. The golden age Augustus built was polished so perfectly that any imperfection beneath it began to rot. Power had grown absolute, but so had paranoia. Senators feared their shadows, generals their own triumphs, and poets their words. What Augustus had built to protect Rome now began to consume it. The empire became a labyrinth of secrets, betrayals, and executions whispered at midnight. The peace that once defined Rome twisted into a silence that devoured truth itself. Statues of Augustus still gleamed in the sunlight, their marble smiles eternal, yet lifeless. The people spoke his name as if it could still save them, not realizing that his peace had required their obedience. Those who remembered his reign saw the pattern unfolding again, an empire addicted to control, blind to decay. The illusion had become reality, and now the illusion was all that remained. Augustus had sought to make Rome immortal, but in doing so, he had bound it to the very thing he feared most, the inevitability of its own corruption. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the provinces. Legions questioned their loyalty. Emperors rose and fell like passing storms, each claiming to restore the glory of Augustus. Yet none could grasp it. The empire stretched too wide, its heart beating to faint. Rome had become a god that no longer believed in itself. In every triumphal march, there was a tremor of uncertainty. In every monument, an echo of regret. The marble empire still stood, but the soul of Rome was beginning to fracture, haunted by the perfection it could never again achieve. And so, Augustus' legacy lingered not as peace, but as a riddle. Was he the savior who saved Rome from ruin, or the architect of its inevitable fall? His empire endured for centuries, but his shadow endured longer. It reached through time, whispering to every ruler who ever dreamed of control. You can build eternity, but you will never own it, for even the greatest empire is only a reflection in the water, beautiful, fast, and destined to disappear with the ripple of time. And in that reflection, Augustus still watches, waiting, eternal in shadow. Centuries passed, and the world forgot the sound of Rome's legions. Empires rose and fell, kings came and went, yet the name Augustus lingered like a scent in the corridors of time. His image, carved into coins and monuments, became more than history, it became memory itself. Artists painted his calm eyes, philosophers studied his rule, and rulers invoked his name as if his ghost could crown them with legitimacy. But ghosts have strange appetites. The more they are remembered, the less they belong to truth. Augustus had ceased to be a man. He had become an idea, and ideas never die. From the Byzantine emperors to the Holy Roman Caesars, from Napoleon to modern dictators, each borrowed a spark of his shadow. They spoke of order, of unity, of peace, always the same promise that had once seduced Rome. And yet, beneath every golden empire built in his name, the same cracks appear. Paranoia, deception, decay. They called themselves restorers, heirs of Augustus, guardians of civilization, but they all inherited his curse. To rule forever is to live in fear of time. Every empire that chased his illusion found itself haunted by it. In the ruins of Rome, Tourists walk beneath broken columns that once touched the heavens. They take pictures, unaware that they stand upon layers of stories buried by centuries of silence. The stones still whisper not of triumph, but of transformation. The same marble that praised Augustus now mourns him. The gods he worshipped have turned to dust. Yet the world still kneels to the idea of power he perfected. Democracy, monarchy, dictatorship all wear the same crown, forged from his dream of control. And still, the question remains, did he build peace or a pattern? The ghost of Augustus lives not in tombs, but in boardrooms, palaces, and parliaments. Every leader who believes they can shape destiny hears his echo in their ambition. Every empire that claims to bring peace while silencing truth breathes his legacy. His face is gone, but his philosophy survives. Control dressed as harmony, illusion disguised as order. It is the most dangerous inheritance of all, one that binds humanity to the eternal cycle of creation and collapse. The empire never ended. It simply changed its name. And somewhere, beyond time's horizon, his spirit watches. Not as a god, not as a man, but as the embodiment of the greatest paradox ever written in stone, that the dream of perfection is the most human flaw of all. The ghost of empire lingers in every nation that dares to believe it can outlive its own shadow. Augustus promised eternity, and in a way, he succeeded. For though his body turned to dust 2,000 years ago, his empire still rules not in land, but in the hearts of those who fear chaos more than truth. 2 millennia have passed, yet the spirit of Augustus lingers, not in Rome alone, but in every empire that dreams of order, legacy, and eternity. From the palaces of Europe to the corridors of modern power, rulers have chased the same illusion he perfected. The promise of control disguised as peace. Cities rise and fall, dynasties crumble. Yet the principles Augustus carved into history endure. Propaganda, symbolism, loyalty built on fear, and myth dressed as law. In every capital, in every seat of authority, the shadow of the first emperor still whispers, reminding humanity that power is never free. Even in the age of democracy, technology, and global empires, his lessons remain unseen but palpable. Nations construct monuments, write histories, and manipulate perception, just as Augustus did. Public ceremonies, political spectacles, and media campaigns echo the same strategy. He used to turn a boy into a god. The people cheer, convinced they witness truth, yet reality bends to the narrative. Augustus' empire has become invisible yet immortal. No longer bound by borders or armies, it lives in the minds of those who wield influence and in the blind obedience of those who follow. Historians debate his morality, philosophers dissect his strategy, and storytellers mythologize his life. But beyond scholarship lies the haunting reality. The empire Augustus built was never simply Rome. It was a blueprint, an eternal architecture of power that outlives kings, kingdoms, and even civilizations. Every ruler who seeks to leave a mark, every government that claims to bring stability while hiding manipulation, walks in the long shadow of Augustus. He was the first to show the world that control can endure longer than flesh, and fear can last longer than love. In quiet moments, one can imagine him watching still, beyond tombs, beyond history, beyond mortality. His eyes see through time, calculating, observing, and understanding every empire that has dared to rise since. And in that gaze lies a warning. The pursuit of perfection is seductive, the illusion of harmony irresistible, yet every such dream carries the seed of its own unraveling. Augustus taught the world that immortality is possible, but only as an idea. Shadow, a memory that bends reality without ever truly living in it. And so, The story concludes, yet it never truly ends. The empire lives on in nations, ideologies, and even in our fascination with power. Augustus achieved eternity, not by conquering lands, but by conquering perception. He turned the past into prophecy, history into legend, and shadow into empire. For as long as humans dream of order, myth, and greatness, the first emperor rules still invisible, eternal, and utterly unchallenged. And somewhere, in the silent corners of the world, his ghost waits, patient as ever, watching the last empire rise and fall. Rome gleamed like a crown beneath the Mediterranean sun. Marble temples, golden arches, and vast arenas rose where chaos once ruled. The world called it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But peace, as Augustus knew too well, was never free. It was purchased through fear, silence, and careful illusion. The Senate sang praises to their first citizen, not realizing that the republic they once defended was now a ghost wearing Augustus' smile. Every statue, every speech, every festival whispered one truth. Rome had not been saved, it had been transformed. Citizens rejoiced, poets sang of eternal glory, and merchants prospered under his name. Yet, behind the perfection, a quiet unease lingered in the air. Those who remembered the old days, the blood, the debates, the chaotic liberty of the Republic felt a chill in the order. Streets were clean, but voices were gone. Dissent had been buried beneath marble, replaced by harmony, too flawless to be real. The people loved their emperor because they were told to. They feared him because they needed to. And somewhere within that fragile balance, truth began to decay beneath the weight of obedience. Even Augustus, the great architect of illusion, could not escape the machinery he built. Each decree, each reform, each celebration tied him tighter to the divine image he projected. He was no longer allowed to doubt, to feel. The man who had mastered power became its prisoner. To preserve Rome's perfection, he had to hide its flaws and his own. Scandals were silenced, betrayals were written, and tragedies disguised as virtue. His family tore itself apart under the pressure of his legacy, their humanity crushed beneath the expectation of godhood. And yet, Augustus smiled, always serene, always eternal. The image never cracked. Historians would call this era a miracle, but miracles often come with shadows unseen. In the countryside, farmers whispered of taxes that drained their blood. In the Senate, old men toasted to freedom they no longer believed in. In the hearts of poets, doubt took root. Could peace truly exist if it was built on control? Could Rome endure if its god was still just a man behind the mask? The empire glittered like a jewel, yet every gem hides fractures beneath its shine. Rome's perfection was not truth, it was theater, and every empire built on illusion is one heartbeat away from awakening. As Augustus aged, the mirage he created began to waver. His body weakened, but the myth remained unbroken. Even in death, he refused to be mortal, his image carved into eternity, his name spoken as divine. Yet the question that haunted his reign echoed beyond his grave. Was it peace he built or silence? The empire would march on for centuries under his shadow, carrying both his brilliance and his curse. For in the heart of every golden age, there is always a secret. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it hides.